"Your time here is over, Mom. You can leave now." Those were the words my daughter said to me on her wedding day. For a moment, the entire ballroom froze. My heart stopped, and the air around me turned heavy, like I was standing underwater. I could hear the music fade, the laughter die, and still her words echoed inside me, slicing through every sacrifice I had ever made. Years of sleepless nights, double shifts, and silent prayers all reduced to one cold sentence. I had imagined this day 1,000 times, the day my only daughter would walk down the aisle, the day we would finally find peace. But instead, I stood there as a stranger in her life, humiliated in front of 200 guests. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to become invisible because in her eyes, I already was. Have you ever given someone everything, only to realize they no longer see you? If you have, you'll understand this story. And if you haven't, I hope you never do. Stay until the end, because what happened after that moment changed not only my life, but the way I understood love, forgiveness, and self-worth. My name is Maggie Dawson, 62 years old, a widow living alone in a small apartment in Seattle. For 15 years, I worked 2 jobs to give my daughter, Lauren, the future she dreamed of. I believed that kind of devotion would be enough to guarantee her love. I was wrong. The day of her wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and maybe the day we finally healed our distance. But it became the night I lost my daughter and found myself. The morning the invitation arrived, the sky over Seattle was gray and heavy, the kind of sky that makes you feel the world is holding its breath. I was sitting by the kitchen window, sipping instant coffee from the same chipped mug I had used for years. The sound of rain tapping softly against the glass filled the silence of my small apartment. Then I heard the mail slot click. I walked slowly to the door, half expecting another bill or maybe a flyer from the grocery store. Instead, there it was, a thick ivory envelope, embossed with gold letters, Lauren Dawson and Andrew Miller. My hands trembled before I even opened it. I didn't need to. I already knew. My daughter was getting married. I stared at the elegant lettering for a long time, unable to breathe. The invitation was beautiful, expensive, the kind you see in magazines. For a moment, I just held it close to my chest and smiled. Then the smile began to fade, because as much as I wanted to feel joy, something inside me ached with quiet uncertainty. Lauren and I had not spoken properly in months. Our calls had turned short and polite, our texts rare and distant. After her father, John, died 15 years ago, something in her changed something in both of us did. She was only 12 then, angry at the world, and maybe at me for not being enough. After John's funeral, I promised myself I would give her everything I could. I sold our house in Tacoma and moved to a smaller apartment near Seattle, closer to her school. I worked at a local diner by day and cleaned offices at night. Every dollar went toward her education, her dreams, her future. I remember the night she told me she wanted to attend a private university. Tuition was higher than I could ever afford, but I nodded and said, "We'll make it work." And somehow, we did. I sold the jewelry John had given me, including my wedding ring. I told her it was just a piece of metal, but when I dropped it into the pawnshop clerk's hand, I felt like I was selling a part of myself. Years passed. Lauren graduated with honors. She got a good job in marketing, moved to Boston, and sent postcards on holidays. "Busy but doing well. Hope you're okay, Mom." That was usually all. When the invitation arrived, I wanted to believe it meant something more. Maybe she wanted me there not just as an obligation, but as her mother. Maybe this wedding could bring us closer again. I placed the envelope carefully on the table, as if it were something sacred, and read the details over and over. The ceremony would be held at the Grand Oak Hotel, a luxurious venue overlooking the Charles River. The reception to follow in the ballroom. Formal attire. Please RSVP by September 1. There is no happen. I laughed softly. She didn't need to write formal. I hadn't owned anything fancy in years, but I was determined to find something special. If this was the chance to reconnect with my daughter, I wanted to look like the mother she could be proud of. The next weekend, I took the bus downtown to a small boutique. The clerk, a young woman with a kind smile, asked if I needed help. "I'm going to my daughter's wedding," I said, trying not to sound nervous. She brought out a navy blue dress with lace sleeves. When I tried it on, I almost didn't recognize myself. The mirror reflected a woman who still had some light left in her, even after all these years. "That color looks lovely on you," the clerk said. I nodded, pretending not to tear up. I bought the dress, even though it cost nearly a month's pay. I told myself it was an investment not in the fabric, but in hope. For the next few weeks, I planned everything down to the smallest detail. I bought a string of pearls that reminded me of my mother. I picked out a gift for Lauren and Andrew, a fine china set, the kind newlyweds might use for special occasions. It was too expensive, so I paid in 12 installments. I didn't care. This was my daughter's wedding. I also rehearsed what I might say to her when we finally saw each other again. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. You look beautiful. I've missed you. But every version sounded small compared to the weight of everything I felt. In quiet moments, I found myself drifting back to the day she left for college. She had hugged me quickly at the train station, barely meeting my eyes. "I'll call, Mom," she'd said. But the calls were rare, and when they did come, they were filled with silence. I always ended them with, "I love you," even when she didn't say it back. Now, as I stood ironing the navy dress a few days before the flight to Boston, I whispered again, "This time will be different." The night before I left, I called her. She answered after 3 rings. "Hey, Mom," she said, her voice brisk. "I got your RSVP. Thanks for coming." "Of course I'll be there," I replied softly. "It means a lot to me." There was a pause. "Yeah, well, it's going to be a busy day. Just follow the seating chart, okay? Everything's kind of organized." Her tone was polite, distant, like I was another guest. "I understand," I said, forcing a smile she couldn't see. "Okay, I'll see you Saturday." "Lauren," I began, but she had already hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the rain, remembering her laugh when she was little, the way she used to curl up next to me after nightmares. Somewhere along the way, she had built a wall between us, and I had let her. Maybe I was too afraid to push back. At dawn, I packed my suitcase. The navy dress hung neatly inside, next to the small box with the china gift. I double-checked my ticket and my wallet. Then I stood by the window, watching the first light touch the city. The clouds were clearing, and for the first time in days, I saw a patch of blue sky. As the taxi pulled away from my apartment, I looked back at the life I had built, small, quiet, filled with sacrifices no one ever saw. I told myself this trip would be worth it, that all the years of distance and silence would melt away once she saw me again. At the airport, families rushed past me, laughter echoing through the terminal. I held the ticket tightly and whispered, "This time, she'll see me." The flight to Boston was long but peaceful. I watched the clouds from my window seat, imagining Lauren's face, the sound of her voice calling me Mom again, not out of duty but affection. When the plane landed, I took a deep breath. Tomorrow would be her wedding day, the day I had dreamed of and dreaded all at once. I checked into a small inn near the venue, laid out my dress, and placed the china gift carefully on the table. The invitation lay beside it, its golden letters gleaming under the soft lamplight. I traced my daughter's name with my fingertip and whispered, "Please, let this be our new beginning." Slashman is not perfited, but somewhere deep inside, a quiet fear stirred a feeling that this day might not bring the reconciliation I longed for, but something entirely different. And I had no idea that the next 24 hours would change everything. The next afternoon, the sun over Boston was soft and golden, the kind of light that makes everything look like a memory before it even happens. I arrived early at the Grand Oak Hotel, holding the small wrapped gift in my trembling hands. My navy blue dress felt almost too formal for me, but I told myself this was what mothers did. We showed up, we smiled, we held our breath, and we hoped our children saw us with pride. Inside the church, everything was breathtaking. White roses, candles, gold ribbons tied to every pew. I inhaled deeply, trying to calm the nervous flutter in my chest. For a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this day would heal everything between us. A young man with an earpiece approached me. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can I have your name?" "Maggie Dawson," I said, straightening my shoulders. "I'm the mother of the bride." He scanned his list, frowning slightly. "Yes, of course. You're seated in row 7, left side." "Row 7?" I repeated, thinking he must have misspoken. "I'm her mother. Shouldn't I be in the first row?" "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quickly, his eyes avoiding mine. "Those seats are reserved for the groom's family and close friends." I felt the air leave my lungs. For a second I wanted to argue. to demand what was right. But instead, I nodded. "Thank you." My voice barely carried. I walked down the aisle, passing faces I didn't know, people whispering and smiling politely as I took my seat among strangers. From where I sat, I could barely see the altar. It felt like being erased in plain sight. When the music began, everyone turned to look at the bride. Lauren walked in alone, radiant, elegant, her white gown shimmering under the soft lights. I had offered to walk her down the aisle. She had said no. "It's not traditional anymore, Mom," she had told me over the phone. But watching her now, walking alone, I realized it wasn't about tradition. It was about distance. As she passed my row, I smiled, tears already filling my eyes. She didn't look at me. The ceremony went smoothly. Andrew looked at her with the kind of love every mother hopes her daughter will find. When they exchanged vows, I pressed the small handkerchief in my lap, trying not to cry too loudly. Maybe this wasn't about me. Maybe it didn't matter where I sat. After the ceremony, everyone moved to the ballroom for the reception. The hall sparkled with chandeliers and laughter. I found my table near the back, far from the bride and groom's table. The guests around me introduced themselves co-workers of Andrew's, distant relatives from his side. "And you're?" one woman asked kindly. "I'm the bride's mother," I said with a soft smile. She blinked, surprised. "Oh, you're so far away from the family tables." I laughed awkwardly. "Yes, well, it's a big wedding." Dinner was served. Glasses clinked. People danced. I watched from my seat, invisible. Lauren hugged Andrew's parents, kissed his mother's cheek, and laughed the way she hadn't laughed with me in years. When she finally looked my way, I smiled, raising my glass slightly. She gave a polite smile back, the kind you give to a distant relative. Then came the toasts. My heart pounded. This was the moment. Maybe she'd thank me, mention the years I'd worked for her future, the sacrifices, the love. Andrew stood first. He thanked his family, his friends, and everyone who helped make the day special. He didn't mention me, but I didn't mind. It wasn't his place. Then Lauren stood, holding her champagne glass. "I want to thank everyone who's here tonight," she began, her voice clear and confident. "Especially those who have truly been my family, the people who supported me, who made me who I am today." She looked directly at Andrew's parents. "You welcomed me like your own daughter," she said, her voice warm and full of emotion. "You gave me the love of a family I always dreamed of." The room applauded. I froze. A dull ringing filled my ears. I tried to smile, but my lips wouldn't move. Did she really just say that the family she always dreamed of? Lauren turned slightly, her gaze landing on me for the first time that night. Her eyes were cold, detached. "I've learned that family isn't just blood," she said. "Sometimes, family are the people who lift you up, not the ones who drag you down." The crowd grew quiet. The silence was thick, electric. My chest tightened. I knew those words were meant for me. And then she said it, calmly, almost kindly. "Mom, I think it's time for you to go." A murmur rippled through the room. Every head turned toward me. I could feel the heat rush to my face, my hands trembling as the glass in my grip slipped slightly. I wanted to disappear. For a moment, no one moved. Then a voice cut through the silence. "No," said Andrew, his chair scraping loudly as he stood. His face was pale but burning with anger. He took the microphone from Lauren's hand. "Before Mrs. Dawson leaves," he said, his voice steady but shaking slightly, "there's something everyone here deserves to know." Lauren's smile vanished. "Andrew, don't do this." "I have to," he said. He looked at me, then at the crowd. "When Lauren and I got engaged, she told me her mother was controlling and bitter. She said you never supported her, that you held her back." He turned toward me again, but I learned the truth. "If you did not now there, Wade." The room was silent, the kind of silence that feels like holding your breath underwater. I learned that when her father died, Mrs. Dawson worked 2 jobs just to keep them afloat, that she sold her wedding ring to pay for Lauren's college tuition, that she gave up her own dreams so her daughter could have hers. Tears filled my eyes. I wasn't sure if they were from shame or relief. Andrew's voice broke. "A woman who does that doesn't deserve humiliation. She deserves respect." He looked at Lauren, "And I can't marry someone who would treat her mother this way." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. He took off his ring and placed it on the table. "This wedding is over." Suddenly, Lauren's face went white. "Andrew, please." she cried. "Don't do this to me, not here." He turned to her, eyes filled with sorrow. "You did this yourself." And with that, he walked out. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my ears. Every pair of eyes in the room burned into my skin. I wanted to run, to hide, but instead, I took a deep breath. Slowly, I placed my napkin on the table and rose to my feet. My legs shook, but I walked. Head high, shoulders straight. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. Behind me, Lauren's voice cracked through the silence. "Mom, please, don't go." But I didn't turn around. Not this time. Have you ever been hurt by someone you love so deeply that the pain almost feels unreal? Do you believe Andrew did the right thing, or was Lauren only trying to protect her peace? If you stand with Andrew, comment your age or where you're watching from to show your support. And if you think Lauren had her reasons, hit like on this video. Don't forget to subscribe. More family drama stories like this one are coming soon. I stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight on my chest begin to lift. Tomorrow, everything would change. When I stepped out of the Grand Oak Hotel that night, the cool Boston air hit my face like a wake-up call. The streetlights shimmered against the wet pavement. Behind me, laughter and murmurs from the ballroom faded into a distant hum, as if that world no longer belonged to me. I walked to the garden at the side of the hotel and sat down on a cold wooden bench. For a long time, I just stared at my trembling hands. My chest still felt tight, but the tears had stopped. It was strange. I had just been humiliated in front of 200 people, but what I felt now wasn't shame anymore. It was silence. A heavy, hollow silence that somehow felt freeing. I had spent my entire life apologizing for not being enough, not being rich enough, not being strong enough, not being the kind of mother Lauren wanted. But at that moment, sitting alone under the faint glow of the streetlight, I realized I had done everything I could. I had given her everything I had, and still, it was never enough. Maybe it was time to stop begging for her love. My phone buzzed in my purse, pulling me back to reality. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Carrie, my sister. "Maggie," her voice came through, worried. "How did it go? Are you still at the wedding?" I hesitated. There was no wedding. "What do you mean?" I let out a soft, almost bitter laugh. "It's a long story. Can you come pick me up?" "Of course. Are you okay?" I looked up at the sky, where a few stars were barely visible through the city haze. "I think so," I said quietly. "For the first time in a long while, I think I actually am." Carrie arrived 30 minutes later. She stepped out of her car, wrapping me in her warm, familiar hug. "Oh, Maggie," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What did she do?" "It doesn't matter," I said, surprising myself with the calm in my tone. "Let's just go." The drive to her house was quiet. I leaned my head against the window, watching the blurred lights pass by. My reflection stared back at me, a woman who had aged too quickly, carrying years of exhaustion and invisible pain. Yet somewhere beneath that, I saw something else: strength. When we got to Carrie's house, she made me chamomile tea and led me to the kitchen table. "Start from the beginning," she said gently. I told her everything: the seating arrangement, the cold looks, the speech, Andrew's outburst. She gasped, her hand covering her mouth. "I can't believe she did that to you, after all you sacrificed." I stirred my tea, watching the steam rise. "I can believe it. I just didn't want to." Carrie shook her head, her eyes fierce. "You've always done everything for her, Maggie. You gave up your career, your savings, your life. You've let her take and take until there was nothing left, and she never saw it." Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. "I thought if I gave enough," I said softly, "she would love me more." Carrie reached across the table, taking my hand. "That's not love, honey. That's guilt disguised as devotion. You've spent years believing that being a good mother meant losing yourself." Her words sank deep. For years, I had defined myself by my daughter. My value existed only in what I could do for her. Without her approval, who was I? That night, I slept in Carrie's guest room. I thought I would cry myself to sleep, but instead, I lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of the night. Every image from the wedding replayed in my mind: the moment Lauren told me to leave, the shock on people's faces, Andrew's voice defending me. But one image stood out more than the others. Me, walking out of that ballroom with my head held high. I had never seen myself like that before. In the morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains. Carrie was already up, making breakfast. She looked at me as I entered the kitchen. "You look different," she said, smiling softly. "Different how?" "Peaceful, like you finally put down a weight you didn't know you were carrying." I smiled faintly. Maybe I did. We ate quietly for a while, then Carrie asked, "What are you going to do now?" I sipped my coffee, thinking, I don't know. For once, I don't have a plan. I'm not thinking about how to fix things. I'm not thinking about what Lauren needs. Maybe it's time to think about what I need. Carrie nodded approvingly. That's a start. After breakfast, I packed my things, ready to head back to Seattle. Carrie hugged me tightly at the door. "You can stay here as long as you need, okay? Don't rush yourself." On the flight home, I stared out the window. Below, the clouds stretched like endless white fields. I thought about Andrew. About how he had stood up for me when even my own daughter didn't. He barely knew me, yet he had seen what I couldn't see in my self-worth. Maybe that was the beginning of something new, not with him, but with me. When I arrived back in Seattle, my apartment felt both familiar and foreign. The framed photo of Lauren at her college graduation sat on the shelf. I picked it up, running my fingers over her smiling face. I didn't feel anger anymore, just sadness and, strangely, gratitude. Because if not for that terrible night, I might have spent the rest of my life waiting for her approval. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, the same spot where I had read her wedding invitation. The rain had started again, gentle and rhythmic. I closed my eyes and whispered, "It's time. Time to stop surviving. Time to start living for myself." My phone buzzed again, another message from Carrie. "Just checking in. You doing okay?" I smiled and replied, "I think I'm better than okay." I set the phone aside and looked out at the gray Seattle sky. For years, I had thought the rain made everything gloomy. But that day, it looked like renewal, like the world washing itself clean. What would come next, I didn't know. But for the first time, not knowing didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. Tomorrow, I would wake up in my own bed, maybe cook breakfast for one, maybe walk to the park. I would begin to learn what life felt like without guilt as my compass. And somewhere deep down, I had a feeling this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where I wouldn't be the supporting character in someone else's story, but the main one in my own. It had been a week since the wedding that never happened. The headlines in the local papers had faded, the gossip online had slowed, but inside me, the echo of that night was still alive. I thought of Lauren often, though I tried not to. Every time I did, the images came back, the look on her face when Andrew walked away, the sound of her voice calling out for me as I left. For 7 days, my phone hadn't stopped ringing, calls, messages, all from her. At first, I ignored them. I told myself I needed space, that I deserved silence after years of begging for attention. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of what I might hear. Afraid that if I answered, I'd fall right back into the same pattern, her breaking me forgiving her. Then, on the 8th day, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Lauren standing there. She looked nothing like the radiant bride from a week ago. Her hair was tied in a messy bun, her face pale and swollen from crying. She held a tissue in one hand, and when she saw me, her shoulders dropped as if the weight of the world had finally caught up to her. "Mom," she said quietly, almost like a child again. "Can we talk?" I stood there for a long moment, my hand still on the doorknob. Part of me wanted to slam it shut, to protect myself from the pain that always seemed to follow her presence. But another part, the one that still remembered the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after a nightmare, couldn't. "Come in," I said finally. She stepped inside, looking around the small living room as if seeing it for the first time. She sat down on the edge of the couch, fidgeting with her hands. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, thick and fragile. "Andrew won't answer my calls," she said at last. "He canceled everything. The honeymoon, the reception, even the apartment we were supposed to move into. He's gone, Mom." I nodded slowly. "I'm sorry to hear that." Her eyes filled with tears. "Are you? You must hate me after what I did." "I'll tan today." I sat down across from her, keeping my tone steady. "I don't hate you, Lauren. I'm disappointed. I'm hurt. But hate? No. I could never hate you." She wiped her eyes with the tissue, her voice trembling. I don't know why I did it, why I said those things. It was like I wanted to prove something. I don't even know what. You wanted control, I said gently. You've always wanted to feel like you were the one choosing, not the one being cared for. Her head dropped. I didn't want to feel like I owed you my life. The words hit me hard. Owed me? She nodded. Every time I looked at you, I felt guilty. Guilty for everything you gave up. Guilty for Dad's death, for how hard things were after. It was easier to stay away than to face that. I exhaled slowly. So you punished me for loving you. Her eyes shot up, full of pain. I didn't mean to. I just didn't know how to deal with it. I thought if I pushed you away, I could stop feeling guilty. I let the words sink in. For years, I'd tried to understand why my daughter had grown so cold. Now, for the first time, her cruelty made sense. It didn't excuse it, but it explained it. I spent years thinking I failed you, I said softly. That maybe I smothered you, or that my love wasn't the kind you needed. But the truth is, I never expected perfection from you, Lauren. I just wanted respect. She looked down again, her voice small. I don't deserve your respect, or your forgiveness. Maybe not yet, I said. But you can earn it. You can start by understanding that love doesn't mean erasing yourself. I spent too many years thinking being a good mother meant losing who I was. I won't do that again. Her lip trembled. I don't know how to fix this. Neither do I admitted. But I know it can't be fixed overnight. And it can't be fixed by pretending nothing happened. She nodded, tears rolling freely now. What do you want me to do? I thought about it for a moment. I want you to take responsibility. I want you to learn what love really means. And maybe, most importantly, I want you to grow up. Lauren's sobs broke through the air. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Watching her cry, a part of me still ached to comfort her, to pull her into my arms like I used to. But I stayed where I was. This time, she needed to feel it. After a while, she looked up. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I honestly don't know, I said. Forgiveness isn't something I can give just because you asked for it. You hurt me deeply. You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. That doesn't just disappear. She nodded slowly, accepting the truth. I want to change, she said. I want to be better. I don't want to be this person anymore. Then start by being honest with yourself, with others, with me. If you want a relationship, it has to be built on truth, not guilt or appearances. She took a deep breath. I'll try. We sat there for a long while, both quiet, both tired. There was no magical resolution, no sudden warmth. But something had shifted. For the first time in years, we were having an honest conversation, not as mother and daughter locked in old patterns, but as two flawed women facing the truth. When she stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. Mom? Yes? Do you still love me? The question was so soft I almost didn't hear it. I smiled faintly. Of course I do. But I love myself now too, and that means things have to change. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I understand. After she left, I stood by the window, watching her walk down the street. The sky had turned orange with sunset, and her figure grew smaller with every step. For the first time, I didn't feel panic watching her leave. I didn't feel that desperate urge to chase her, to fix everything. Instead, I felt a strange calm, the kind that comes after a storm when the air is finally still. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe we'd find our way back to each other. Maybe we wouldn't. But whatever came, I knew this. I would no longer lose myself trying to be loved. And as I closed the door behind me, a new thought came quietly, almost like a whisper. Maybe it was time to start living again. The weeks after Lauren's visit passed quietly, like the calm that follows a storm. Seattle's skies were gray again, but for the first time, the rain didn't feel heavy. It felt cleansing. I spent my mornings drinking coffee by the window, listening to the rhythm of raindrops on the glass. The sound no longer made me lonely. It made me feel alive. I had been living in that small apartment for almost 20 years, but it suddenly looked new to me. I saw the blank walls, the faded curtains, the empty shelves, and I decided it was time to change. Not for anyone else, but for myself. I went to the hardware store and bought a few cans of paint. The clerk asked if I needed help choosing a color. Something light, I said. Something that makes me feel awake. I picked a shade of soft green called morning sage. It took me 3 days to finish painting, moving slowly, one wall at a time. When I stepped back, I didn't just see a brighter apartment, I saw a woman learning to take up space again. After that, I bought plants. Too many, probably. Ferns, succulents, a tall fiddle-leaf fig that reached for the sunlight through the window. Every morning, I watered them and whispered small words of encouragement. "We're both growing," I'd say with a smile. I started cooking for one with care again. I made soup that filled the kitchen with warmth, tried recipes I'd never had time for before, and even laughed when I burned a pan. My life wasn't perfect, but it was finally mine. Still, some nights I would sit on the couch and think of Lauren. Her face haunted me not with anger, but with sorrow. I knew she was trying to change, to heal, just as I was, but I couldn't go back yet. Not until I was strong enough to meet her without losing myself again. One rainy afternoon, as I was rearranging a shelf, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something in me said to answer. "Hello? Mrs. Dawson? This is Andrew Miller." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard his voice since that awful night at the wedding. "Andrew," I said quietly. "How are you?" He sighed softly. "Better now, I guess. It's been a strange few weeks. I've had to explain to a lot of people why I walked out on my own wedding." "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure why. "Don't be," he replied. "You didn't do anything wrong. Honestly, I think you saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." I didn't know what to say. Silence filled the line until he continued. "That night opened my eyes, Mrs. Dawson. I saw the kind of strength you had, the kind of love that sacrifices without asking for anything in return. It made me think about my own mother. She passed away when I was in college. She was like you, quiet, steady, always giving more than she had. I never got to thank her properly. Maybe that's why I called." His words touched something deep inside me. "That's kind of you to say," I whispered. "There's another reason I'm calling," he said, his tone shifting. "I'm working on a project, something I've been dreaming about for years. I want to create a space for women, like my mother, like you, a place where they can rebuild their lives after being overlooked, abandoned, or forgotten." I blinked, taken aback. "What kind of space?" "A community center," he said. "It's called the Renewal Center, a place for women to rediscover who they are, to find purpose again." The name alone sent chills down my spine. Renewal. It was the word I had been living without knowing it. "I want you to be a part of it," Andrew said. "Not as a worker, as a partner." "Me?" I laughed softly. "Andrew, I don't know anything about running a center." He chuckled. "You know more than you think. You know what it feels like to lose yourself. You know what it takes to start over. That's something no degree can teach." I sat there, staring at the soft green wall I had painted, the plants beside me stretching toward the window. Maybe he was right. "Let me think about it," I said finally. "Of course. Take your time," he replied. "But I'd love for you to see the site. It's just outside the city. Maybe tomorrow?" Something inside me stirred curiosity, maybe even hope. "All right," I said. "Tomorrow." When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The sound of rain outside had softened, replaced by the distant hum of traffic. I looked around my apartment, the walls, the plants, the quiet comfort I had built, and felt both gratitude and restlessness. Maybe it was time to step outside these walls again. That night, I could hardly sleep. My mind replayed Andrew's words over and over. A place for women to rediscover who they are. Wasn't that what I had been doing all along? The next morning, I woke early. I put on a simple blouse, brushed my hair, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked older, yes, but stronger. Softer in some ways, but unbreakable. Andrew picked me up just after 9. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, until the city faded into open land. He parked beside an empty lot surrounded by tall trees. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. "This is it," he said, "the Renewal Center." I stepped out of the car, my shoes sinking slightly into the damp ground. I could already imagine it, the walls, the gardens, the laughter of women rebuilding their lives. "It's beautiful," I said quietly. "It will be," he replied, smiling. "And it needs someone who understands what renewal really means." I looked at him, and for a moment, words failed me. I thought of all the years I had spent feeling invisible. Maybe all of that pain had been leading me here to this place, this purpose. "Andrew," I said softly, I think I want to help. His face lit up with quiet relief. Then let's start building something that matters. As we stood there in the misty morning light, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time: excitement. The kind that comes from possibility, from the idea that the best part of your life might still be ahead of you. When I returned home that afternoon, I sat by the window again, watching the rain return. But this time, it didn't sound like sorrow. It sounded like beginnings. Still, one question lingered in my mind: was I really ready to open my heart to the world again? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. The following months became a blur of planning, meetings, and unexpected laughter. For the first time in years, I woke up every morning with a reason to get out of bed. My days were filled with phone calls, sketches, and endless cups of coffee shared with Andrew in his small downtown office that smelled of wood and rain. The Renewal Center started as a dream on paper. Andrew's vision was beautiful, open spaces, gardens, rooms filled with light, but it was more than just architecture. It was about rebuilding lives. I knew that from the moment he first said the words, renewal. We drove out to the property several times a week. The land was surrounded by tall evergreens, and every time we walked through it, I felt peace settle in my chest. "Here," Andrew would say, pointing to an empty stretch of soil. "We'll build the art studio. Over there will be the gardens. And that spot by the hill? Perfect for the reflection pond." I could already imagine it, women sitting on benches under the trees, talking, laughing, healing. I didn't know much about architecture, but I knew how broken people looked when they started to find themselves again. I had lived that story. Andrew often asked for my input. "You're the heart of this project," he said one afternoon, leaning against his truck. "You understand what these women need." Ander, the reference of bread of heart, and the bride full into the first of labbed. His words touched me in ways I didn't expect. For years, I'd been invisible. Now someone was listening. I suggested small things: softer paint colors, cozy reading corners, spaces where women could share stories without feeling judged. He nodded thoughtfully to each idea, sometimes smiling like he already knew I'd be right. As weeks passed, our partnership grew. There was an ease between us, a quiet understanding that didn't need many words. He shared stories about his childhood, about his grandmother who had raised him after his parents divorced. "She was tough," he said, chuckling. "Used to say, 'You can't control the storm, but you can build a shelter.' I guess that's what I'm trying to do now." "Then we'll make sure it's a strong one," I said, smiling. We both laughed, but something about that moment stayed with me. In between meetings and construction plans, we started visiting other community centers around Washington. I met women who reminded me of myself: widows, mothers, women who had been left behind by time and by the people they loved. They told me their stories. I listened. And every time, I saw a reflection of my own pain and also my own hope. Sometimes I'd go home exhausted, but it was the kind of tired that comes from doing something meaningful. At night, I'd sit by my window with a cup of tea and look out at the city lights. For the first time, I didn't feel small anymore. One afternoon, as we reviewed blueprints, Andrew said, "There's something I want you to think about." "What's that?" "When the center is done, I want you to run it." I froze. "Me? Andrew? I'm not qualified. I've never managed anything like that." He smiled. "You've managed a life full of pain, sacrifice, and resilience. You've rebuilt yourself. That's all the qualification you need." I didn't know what to say. His faith in me was both comforting and terrifying. For years, I had defined myself by what others needed. Could I really be the one leading something new? "I'll think about it," I said quietly. He nodded. "That's all I ask." And Evander. In early spring, the first foundation was laid. I remember standing beside the workers, the smell of fresh soil and wet cement mixing with the scent of pine. Andrew handed me a small silver trowel. "Do you want to place the first brick?" My hands shook slightly as I bent down, pressing the brick into the mortar. "For every woman who forgot her worth," I whispered. Andrew heard me and smiled. Perfect dedication. By summer, walls began to rise, and the site was alive with energy. Each time we visited, I felt something blooming inside me, something that had been asleep for years. One afternoon, a reporter from a local newspaper came by after hearing about the project. Andrew introduced me as the inspiration behind the Renewal Center. I laughed nervously. "Inspiration? I'm just trying to help." The reporter smiled. You'd be surprised how many people need a story like yours. That night when I got home, I found an email from Lauren. The subject line read, I saw the article. I hesitated before opening it. Mom, it began, I'm proud of you. I didn't know you were doing something so important. I hope we can talk soon. I stared at the screen, my throat tightening. It was the first kind message she had sent me in years. I wanted to reply immediately, but I didn't. Not yet. I needed time to process, to be sure I wasn't stepping back into old patterns. The next morning, Andrew noticed my distracted mood. Everything okay? I told him about the email. He listened quietly, then said, You don't owe anyone a fast answer. You'll know when you're ready. His understanding gave me comfort. By late summer, the skeleton of the building was nearly complete. I spent long days at the site, helping wherever I could. Sometimes I brought sandwiches for the workers. Other times I just stood watching the walls take shape. Every nail, every brick, every inch of progress felt like a mirror of my own rebuilding. One evening, when the last rays of sunlight stretched across the construction site, Andrew and I stood side by side, watching the light fade. Can you believe this? He said softly. A few months ago, this was just an idea. I nodded. And now it's becoming something real. He looked at me for a moment before saying, You know, Maggie, you've changed since the day I met you. There's something different about you now. I smiled faintly. Maybe I finally stopped living for someone else. He nodded slowly. That's a powerful thing to do. There was a quiet between us then, not awkward, but full of meaning. The kind of silence that feels like a beginning. As I drove home that evening, I thought about his words. He was right. I was changing. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. I was becoming my own person again, but deep inside, I couldn't help wondering about Lauren. Could she change too? Could there ever be a second chance between us? As I lay in bed that night, listening to the soft hum of the city, I didn't know the answer, but I had a feeling that soon I would find out. The Renewal Center was nearly complete when the email from Lauren finally led to something more. I had read it dozens of times but never replied. It wasn't that I didn't want to, it was that I didn't know what to say. How do you start again with someone who once told you to leave their life? It was late autumn when she called. I almost didn't recognize her voice at first. It was softer, slower, hesitant, in a way I had never heard before. Mom, she said, I'd really like to see you, just to talk. There was a long pause before I answered. All right, I said, but we'll meet in a public place, somewhere quiet. We agreed on a small cafe near the lake in downtown Seattle. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting by the window, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. For a moment, I just watched her from the doorway. Her hair was shorter now, her makeup minimal, her expression uncertain. It was like seeing a different person. When she noticed me, she stood up quickly. Hi, Mom. Hi, Lauren. We sat down, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of rain tapping the glass filled the silence. Finally, she took a deep breath. I wanted to say I'm sorry, for everything, for that night, for the way I've treated you all these years. I didn't answer right away. I let her words hang between us. They were heavy, fragile, real. She looked down at her hands. I've been seeing a therapist, she continued quietly. It's been hard, but it's helping me understand myself. What I did to you, the way I pushed you away, it wasn't about you. It was about me. I nodded slowly. I know that now, but knowing doesn't make it hurt less. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just needed to say it. I reached across the table and rested my hand over hers. Her fingers were cold. Lauren, I said softly, I never wanted to be your enemy. I just wanted to be your mother. She covered her mouth as a sob escaped. People around us looked up briefly, then went back to their conversations. I squeezed her hand gently. It's all right, I whispered. Let's start from here. We talked for hours. About her work, about the therapy, about how she had spent months replaying that night over and over. When Andrew walked out, I blamed him, she said, but deep down I knew I had destroyed everything myself, and I knew it started long before that day. What do you mean? I asked. She took a deep breath. When Dad died, I felt like you stopped being a person. You were just Mom, this unstoppable force who never cried, never complained. I think I resented you for that. I thought you didn't feel the pain I did, so I made you my target." Her words hit hard. I hadn't realized that my attempt to be strong for her had built a wall between us. "I thought I was protecting you," I said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but I didn't need protecting. I needed to see that you were human too." For a while, neither of us spoke. The rain outside had stopped, and the late afternoon light was golden, spilling across the table. "I'm proud of what you're doing, Mom," she said finally. "The Renewal Center, it's incredible. I've read everything about it online." I smiled faintly. "It's still a work in progress, like me." She nodded. "Like both of us." Before we left, she hesitated. "Would you mind if I visited the site someday? I'd like to see it for myself." In the savor just at pound. And it was no have the found, with a favor was never face. It is no have the found, that it was no have nother pace of pill, and it was no have the cried with a staste in the lauder nose. It is no have the pottle de habend, with a favor stace, and of the tay plate is into lafe, with it will de habs in the redder to the favor cider, and of the favor de habs of the faced. I looked at her carefully. There was sincerity in her voice, not obligation. "Of course," I said. "I'd like that." That evening, when I told Andrew about the meeting, he smiled. "How do you feel?" "Hopeful," I admitted, "but cautious. We've said sorry before, but this time, it feels different." "It sounds like she's really trying," he said gently. "People can change, Maggie. Sometimes they just need to see who they hurt to understand what love really means." His words stayed with me. A week later, Lauren came to visit the Renewal Center. The main building was nearly finished, with sunlight streaming through the large glass windows. When she arrived, she stood silently at the entrance, looking around. "It's beautiful," she said softly. I didn't expect it to feel so peaceful. I showed her the art studio, the gardens, the reflection pond that overlooked the trees. She stopped often, touching the wooden railings, watching the workers finish the final touches. "Everything about this place feels alive," she said, "like it's breathing hope." "That's what we wanted," I replied, "a place where women can come to start again." She turned to me, her eyes glistening. "I think you've already done that, Mom." I smiled, but my throat tightened. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words caught somewhere inside me. As we walked through the center, she told me more about her life, how she had started volunteering at a local shelter, how therapy had made her rethink everything about her past. "I used to think strength meant pretending nothing hurt," she said, "but I was wrong. Real strength is facing what broke you." I looked at her and realized how much she had changed. The arrogance, the sharpness, they were gone. In their place was a woman who was finally beginning to understand herself. When we reached the garden, she stopped. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think we can ever go back to how things were?" I looked at her, then shook my head gently. "No, sweetheart, we can't go back. But maybe we can build something new, something better." Her lips trembled, and then she smiled through the tears. "I'd like that." We stood there in silence, the wind carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of understanding. When she left that afternoon, she hugged me tightly. It wasn't the quick, distracted embrace I had grown used to. It was real warm, trembling, full of unspoken forgiveness. After she drove away, I stayed in the garden, watching the sunlight fade over the unfinished center. I thought of how far we had come, not just the building, but both of us. Maybe this was what healing looked like, not a perfect reconciliation, but a quiet rebuilding, brick by brick, heart by heart. As I turned toward the main building, I saw Andrew walking toward me, holding 2 cups of coffee. He smiled. "How did it go?" "Better than I hoped," I said. "I think we're finally finding our way back." He handed me the cup. "Then maybe it's time to think about what comes next." I looked around at the center, the sunlight, the laughter of workers, the sound of life returning. "Yes," I said softly, "maybe it is." But deep inside, I knew the real test was still ahead. The Renewal Center was almost ready to open its doors, and with it would come new challenges, new stories, and perhaps a new beginning I hadn't expected. The grand opening of the Renewal Center took place on a warm Sunday afternoon. The sun was soft, the kind that made everything look golden and alive. I arrived early, dressed in a simple green dress that matched the color of the walls I had helped choose months ago. As I walked through the entrance, the scent of fresh paint and flowers filled the air. It didn't smell like a building, it smelled like hope. Andrew was already there, checking the final arrangements. When he saw me, his face lit up. "You're early," he said, handing me a cup of coffee. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted, smiling. "It feels like the night before a wedding." He laughed. "Except this time it's one that's not going to fall apart." I laughed too, realizing how far we had both come since that night that changed everything. By noon, people began to arrive: city officials, volunteers, donors, and dozens of women who had heard about the center through word of mouth. Some came with cautious eyes, others with quiet excitement. They didn't know yet that this place would soon become a home for them. Andrew and I stood together at the front as he began his speech. "The Renewal Center," he said, "was built for women who have lost their way, who've given so much of themselves that they no longer know who they are. It's a place where they can find strength again, not because someone saves them, but because they finally remember how strong they already are." When he turned to me, I felt my throat tighten. "But this center wouldn't exist," he continued, "without the courage and story of one woman who taught me what renewal really means, Maggie Dawson." Applause filled the air. My hands shook as I stepped forward to the microphone. "Thank you," I began, my voice trembling slightly. 7 months ago, I was a woman who believed her life was over. I had spent years giving everything I had: my love, my time, my heart to people who couldn't see my worth. I thought that was what being a good mother meant. But I was wrong. The crowd fell silent. Love isn't about disappearing for someone else. It's about standing beside them while still being whole yourself. The Renewal Center isn't just a place for healing. It's proof that even after heartbreak, humiliation, or loss, life can begin again. You can begin again. I paused, scanning the crowd, and there, near the back, I saw Lauren. She was standing quietly, her eyes shining. I hadn't known if she would come, but she did. Our eyes met, and she smiled. A small, genuine smile that said more than words ever could. I continued. "Every brick of this place holds a story. Stories of women who were told they weren't enough, who believed it for too long, but who finally decided to write their own endings." I took a breath, my voice steady now. Today isn't just about a building. It's about rebirth, about choosing to see yourself not as a victim of life, but as the author of it. When I finished, the crowd stood and applauded. I caught Andrew's proud smile, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing alone. After the ceremony, people walked through the center, touching the walls, admiring the garden, talking softly. I stayed near the entrance, shaking hands, answering questions, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: belonging. Lauren approached quietly, waiting until everyone had drifted away. "Mom," she said softly, "your speech was beautiful." "Thank you." She looked around the center, her eyes full of emotion. "I had no idea it would be like this. You've created something incredible." "We've both come a long way," I said. She nodded, tears forming. "I'm still working on myself, you know, but I'm trying." "I know," I said gently, "and that's enough for now." We stood there, surrounded by laughter and sunlight streaming through the windows. For the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't painful, it was peaceful. As the day came to an end, I walked through the garden one last time. The reflection pond glimmered in the fading light, and I saw my own reflection smiling back, not the tired woman I once was, but someone whole, someone free. Andrew joined me, his hands in his pockets. "You did it, Maggie," he said quietly. "No," I replied, shaking my head. "We did it, all of us." He smiled, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The air was filled with the hum of new beginnings. In the weeks that followed, the Renewal Center became everything we had dreamed of. Women from all over came: widows, single mothers, divorcees, women starting over at 50 or 60. Each one brought her own story, and together they built something extraordinary. Lauren began volunteering once a week, leading small art classes and helping in the cafe we had opened inside the center. Watching her laugh with the other women filled me with a quiet pride I hadn't felt in years. She wasn't perfect, and neither was I, but we were both learning what it meant to love without losing ourselves. One evening, after the last group had left, I walked through the halls alone. The walls were covered with photographs, smiling faces, painted hands, women embracing one another. I ran my fingers across the frames and whispered, We did it. As never do did down to the Inderside. I sat by the window, watching the sunset reflect on the pond outside, and thought about everything that had led me here. The pain, the loss, the loneliness. Every moment had been a stepping stone to this one. Life had broken me, yes, but it had also rebuilt me into someone stronger, someone who finally understood that love doesn't mean sacrifice, it means growth. I picked up my journal and wrote the final line of my story. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. And maybe that's what I wanted others to know too, that renewal is always possible. Because no matter how lost you feel, no matter how far you think you've fallen, it's never too late to start again. If this story touched you, if you believe in second chances and the power of self-worth, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us share more stories that remind us all it's never too late to begin again.